Hello and welcome to a special edition of the Nature Garden podcast with me, Carl Steinson. In this episode we shine a light on one of the world's most famous books, the Lindisfarne Gospels. An amazing work of art made on the Holy Island of Lindisfarne off the coast of Northumberland, England, around 1300 years ago. Acknowledged as a masterpiece of Anglo-Saxon England, the book is a decorated copy of the Gospels of the Bible, featuring ornate painted lettering, drawings and patterned pages with multicultural influences. In 2022, St Mary's Church, Holy Island and Lowick and Holy Island C of E First Schools celebrated the creation of the Lindisfarne Gospels in the Art of Words Festival. I was fortunate to catch up with one of the speakers at the festival, Lindisfarne Gospels expert Professor Michelle Brown. I invite you to join us for a wonderful journey into the work of Eadfrith, Bishop of Lindisfarne, the Lindisfarne Gospels.
My name is Professor Michelle Brown and I'm here on Holy Island on the 7th of October 2022, the anniversary of Bishop Eadfrith's death. For 28 years or so, I was the keeper of medieval manuscripts and illuminated manuscripts at the British Library. And that meant that I was able to actually study the Lindisfarne Gospels and help take care of them, help bring them to the Northeast on exhibition, and to help them to speak to people today. And that was a lifetime's ambition, because my Northumbrian mother and Irish father had first brought me to see them when I was 4, and the interlace had just reached out of the pages and drew me in, and sure enough, my life journey has been very much connected with the Gospels and helping them to speak today.
So I met you last night at this amazing talk about all things Gospels, and here we are. I mean, just describe the scene that we're looking out on, Michelle. It's amazing, isn't it?
It truly is. We're sitting in the rectory on Holy Island, and from the window we can see a great expanse of the water lying between Holy Island and the Northumbrian mainland, the causeway that treks along with its waymarks, guiding pilgrims along the shifting sands. And directly in front of me, I can see a little lump of rock with a wooden cross and the remains of a stone hut upon it, already cut off from the island like a calf to the cow. And that is Cuddy's, where Cuthbert, Eadfrith and the other bishops of Lindisfarne were able to go on retreat at certain times of the year. And it's a remarkable part of the story of Lindisfarne. And we can hear the seals barking, we can hear the waders splashing, we can hear incredible bird song as the birds begin to migrate for the season. And it's a place where elemental nature is all around you, a place of tides and seasons governed by the environment, and very much with a sense, with this great expanse of sea and sky with the thin ribbon of land, of a much bigger picture that this is part of.
We'll come back to Cuddy's Island in a minute, because it's really an important part of the Gospel's story.
Yes.
But going back in time, it's a difficult thing to précis a whole chunk of history quickly, but I'm going to ask you to set the context of how the Gospels came into being. What was the background to that, and how Holy Island became important?
Okay, well, it's a very important part of the history of the whole of the British Isles and Ireland. I think my research shows that the Gospels were made here on Holy Island by Bishop Eadfrith of Lindisfarne between the years of 715 and his death in 722. And it was made as the focal point of the emerging cult of St. Cuthbert and everything that he represented. So to backtrack, the 7th century, some 30 odd years before, had been one of the most dangerous times to actually be alive in terms of warfare, in terms of plague, famine, etc. And 6th, 7th century had evoked a response from a lot of men and women who followed God's call and left the security of being in their families, their tribal kindreds and the laws of their areas, and left in what they called the boat with no oars to actually go as sea waifs to serve God wherever he took them to. And this was the response of areas, some of which had been Christianised under the Roman Empire, which adopted Christianity as its state religion in the 380s, and other areas that had been converted more recently in the 5th century and onwards, such as Ireland. And in 410, the Romans had finally pulled out, and Britain was left to look to its own defence and its own finances, a sort of reverse Brexit, in the face of increasing raids from Germanic pagan peoples from the continent, Irish raiders, Pictish raiders, etc. So this area of what we now think of as the borders between what became England and Scotland is a very important area. It's a very vibrant area culturally. It's a meeting place of a lot of different cultures. Incoming missionaries from Ireland, Pictish and Scotic people. Scotland means island because of Scottish settlers from Ireland who founded the Kingdom of Dalriada in Argyll. It's mixed. There are lots of different people claiming different backgrounds, different ancestries, all with a claim to the land. And set against that, there's the international picture, because these islands did not stand alone. South of Hadrian's Wall and the Antonine Wall, they've been part of a massive empire stretching from here to Syria, and they also carried on trading. We're finding evidence now at places like Tintagel that the olive oil and the wine carried on flowing from Lebanon and Syria and northern Egypt in Britain as late as the 9th century in the Viking Age, which makes changes to the sea routes, if you like. And of course in 793, the monastery of Lindisfarne that had been established in 635 by Irish monks led by St. Aidan, coming from St. Columba's Iona in the Hebrides, an Irish monastery off of the coast of what would become Scotland. They had very great links with the East, and one of the things that's distinctive about what we call Celtic monasticism that Aidan and his followers brought to Holy Island in 635 is that it was influenced not only by Constantinople and Rome, but it was influenced by the simplicity of the Desert Fathers, people who in the persecutions of Christianity in the 3rd and 4th centuries had left the towns, such as Alexandria, had gone into the deserts and had practiced lives of simplicity, of restraint, and often of service within community as well, either as hermits or as communities of individuals living a common life dedicated to prayer, worship, and the service of God in community and social justice. And so this Eastern element carries on being very important. Lindisfarne was renowned for living this lifestyle, which helped to convert Northumbria beyond the court and the corridors of power and to bring it into people's direct lives. And it was by modelling the Gospels and living life in the way in which Jesus taught that they actually commanded people's respect, and whole groups of lay people, men, women and children, would come to live God-centred lives on the island, attached to the monastery. It wasn't a closed monastery with monks and nuns not having anything to do with the outside world. They were very much out there. They were humanitarian aid workers. The bishops of Lindisfarne ran a diocese that stretched right up to Edinburgh and the Firth of Forth. And they had lots of other daughter houses in a whole network in which men and women played equally important roles and were vibrant parts of their community. They were open prisons as well, where people would come to do their community service. office after they'd paid their penalties for any misdemeanours. So they weren't set apart entirely. They were very much of the world, and yet they were spiritual powerhouses and spiritual beacons that modelled a way of living within the environment, within community, and working out into the world for the good. And that's what Lindisfarne came very much along with Iona to symbolise. And in fact, the Irish referred to islands like this and Little Cuddy's Isle as deserts, the watery wildernesses of the north substituting for the sands of the eastern deserts.
Well, when we look out at this beautiful vista and the small island there, Cuthbert's Island, and you're looking at that, it's hard to imagine this amazing mixture of multiculturalism and faith and education and politics all coming together. But this really is the background to the creation of the Gospels. It
is, Carl. And that's why I think the Gospels, in a way, are so important, because they are what's sometimes been called a mirror in parchment or vellum. They are a portal into their age. And it's through those pages and the vision that Bishop Eadfrith created on those pages that we can actually move from the natural landscape and the remaining church buildings of the parish churches and the parish church, the priory, and the other little hermitages around the island and its stone crosses, that we can actually move from that to actually people the landscape with the ideas and other aspects of the faith, the theology, etc. It's an incredibly beautiful book. The Lindisfarne Gospels is a gospel book. It's got Matthew, Mark, Luke and John's Gospels written in Latin in the what we call the Vulgate edition, the common vulgar language of the 4th century when Christianity was accepted by the Roman Empire, Latin. And it's an edition that was made by St. Jerome in a little cell in Bethlehem. Ironically, it's the Lindisfarne Gospels and another great book made in Northumbria, the Codex Amiatinus, one of 3 great single-volume complete Bibles made at Wearmouth Jarrow, that actually preserved the very best versions of Jerome's Vulgate across those intervening centuries, not earlier copies. It was the scholarship that took place in Wearmouth Jarrow, Lindisfarne and other centres in Northumbria, because by the early 8th century they had established library resources in the monasteries, buying books in Rome, in Gaul, getting gifts, etc. And they had developed a very learned culture. The Irish too had a very big oral tradition. They might have not relied on written texts, but they could preserve tremendous amounts of knowledge because they had very well-trained memories. And so you've got all of this learning and study poured in. You've got all of the arts of the different peoples who lived within the areas locally, and you've got that vision of what these styles of art and the motifs were that represent people that you know of from very, very far away. And bear in mind, it was a little boy Bede who went into the monastery at Monk Wearmouth initially when he was 7, who only travelled as far as Lindisfarne, as far as we know. In the whole of his working life, he became the greatest scholar of the Western world after the Roman Empire had crashed and burned, and who wrote a pilgrim guide to the holy places in Palestine, Israel and Egypt that was still being used in the 20th century as the best Baedeker pilgrim guide. And he did that by a journey of the imagination and the spirit that he travelled himself, but by researching all that he could get hold of that remained of the learning of the ancient world, of Ireland and the other British peoples and of the continent. And so Bede was a great friend of Holy Island and a great friend of Bishop Eadfrith, whom I believe made the Gospels himself. And so there's a lot of that pours into the pages. And so when you look at the incredible Esperanto of art that is brought to a perfection, if you like, in the Lindisfarne Gospels, because it's being made with a set vision in mind of actually representing motifs from all of those different peoples, as if we were to go into a restaurant that was fusion cooking, and you would see some things that described Italian cooking, some things that described Lebanese cooking, some that described Irish and Scottish food and English food, and all of those words would summon up tastes and flavours and those peoples, well, using styles and motifs of different art forms and blending them into this incredibly beautiful vision in which the whole of the flora and fauna, all the birds, the animals that are represented, the vegetable forms and the swirls of the movement of the waves, the skies, the winds and the heavens that are in there, show the whole of creation stretching from the farthest points of the western known world and the coast of Ireland right the way to the eastern deserts, all reflected but coming together in harmony, in which nobody's identity is lost and submerged, but together the whole becomes even more beautiful and meaningful than the individual components. And so it's a great paean of praise to a vision of how peoples and creatures can live together in the peaceable kingdom that God intended and created, and a vision of a kingdom which, even if it can't be achieved while you work for it in this world, it's the working for it that actually brings about your participation in an eternal kingdom of God in which everything is reconciled, everything is made whole and living in harmony. And the pages of the opening words of the Gospels explode into this colourful, beautiful vision. And one of the things that I think is so remarkable is that as we sit here, Carl, looking at that little island, the Lindisfarne books is one of the most beautifully and carefully made books of any that I have had a chance to look at in my long career working with manuscripts. And it's amazing because whereas other books like the Codex Amiatinus from Monk Wearmouth Jarrow would have 7, 8 or more people all taking their turns at the work at the scriptorium bench at certain times of the monastic day and night, this book is by one single artist scribe, and we can tell from the way in which the work is interrupted that that artist scribe was about a month away from completing work on the whole project, and nobody else was ever allowed to finish it off except to write the tiny numbers in the margins that make a concordance of the Gospels, what we call canon tables, that show what passages are in Matthew, Mark, Luke and John, where they agree, where they diverge, etc. And they wanted to make that work. And then little dry point crosses in the margins that show that after it was made, the Gospels were only used for reading out of at services at Christmas, Easter and the feasts of St. Cuthbert. The rest of the time we can imagine them on the high altar at Holy Island with the little wooden coffin that the remains of Cuthbert were placed into in 698 when he was found to be incorrupt, the ultimate sign of holiness. His body hadn't decayed, and he's enshrined like Egyptian bishops would be at the time, and the Lindisfarne Gospels becomes the book of life, replacing the Egyptian book of the dead, if you like, as a visible symbol to pilgrims. And then and now, the Lindisfarne Gospels and the Book of Kells, probably made on Iona around 800 for the cult of Columba, are the most visited books in the world. These were places of assembly, and even if the men, women and children who we know as early as the book was created were coming to look at it, it was the most visited site here on Holy Island for pilgrimage until that of Thomas Becket at Canterbury in the late 12th century. People were coming to see this. Most of them couldn't read or write, but they would have had the equivalent of audio guides. They would have people there telling them what it meant, and they would see when they finally, back of the queue, got their couple of moments next to the mystically lit book with candles on the altar next to Cuthbert's tomb, and they'd come for a miracle of healing. They'd dragged their granny 300 miles. This was a life-changing journey, and what they saw on the pages of the book was something wondrous, way beyond the drab earthenware of their everyday world, something colourful, something beautiful, but things in there that showed that their people were part of this. And lo and behold, right next door, mixed into things that show motifs of people they might have been at war with for several hundred years, but together, merging together to create something new, and everybody having a place and a part of it. And oh, look at, there's the cat. This looks just like my cat, and there's the birds that I've seen coming over the causeway, and everything in there. And so it would have had a tremendous impact upon people. And the colours are amazing. If you take a digital photograph of the Lindisfarne Gospels, and you can see many of them online on British Library site and the Holy Island sites as well, you can see plenty of pictures of it. And if you analyse that with Photoshop, it would tell you there were 90 different colours there. Now that's what Constantinople could command in the 8th century with the Silk Route and everything else coming into it. When I helped lead a non-destructive Raman laser project to analyse what substances were actually used. They're all made using 6 local plants and rocks, things that somebody working on Holy Island would have access to. And the purples, 40 shades of purple, and you can pick lichen from the shores of Cuddy's-Isle, and if you boil it up and you add acidic or alkaline substances like stalwee, gives you a nice rich ruby red. If you had things that are more alkaline, you can take it right through to blue. And so you get this incredible variety of colours on the page. But they're symbolic as well, because Eadfrith's best friend Bede is at the time writing about the temple and the tabernacle in Jerusalem and talking about the 40 shades of purple that the temple hangings were coloured with and how they represent the journey of the soul towards God. The blue that's used was thought until 2003 to be lapis lazuli from Badakhshan in the foothills of the Himalayas. Now, Eadfrith couldn't get hold of it. He fakes it using a local plant called woad, but he doesn't just want the blue colour. He suspended in it crystals of hoof and horn animal gum so that it looks like ground lapis rock, because you had to have the recipe to know how finely to grind the particles to get the rich, intense blue. And that fooled scientists, because it looked like ground rock from microscope analysis right up until 2003. And when we look at Cuddy's-Isle, I think that's where a lot, if not all, of the work on the Lindisfarne Gospels may have been made. And my reason for thinking that is because this practice of having a book made by one person in that way is something that goes back to the Desert Fathers. Men and women would make books single-handedly, gospel books and psalters, as an offering penitentially during Lent and Advent, 40 days of Lent and the Advent season. They would be given spiritual retreat time from their other duties to actually focus on prayer and some form of study and creativity that reflected that meditative and contemplative prayer. And within the monasteries founded ultimately by followers of Columba from Iona, their practice was that only what they call the seniors, only the most spiritually tried and tested members of the community, often the bishop, the abbot, or a leading hermit, anchorite or anchoress, men and women, would be able to create that sacrificial offering, because their prayers were the most powerful in their community and the most transformative. And so busy Bishop Eadfrith, running this massive diocese in northern Northumbria and southern Scotland, being an aid worker, bringing the humanitarian aid programmes, any hospital or education provision would have been ultimately his responsibility. The life of prayer and praise and psalmody 8 times every night as a monk, having to engage in the divine office, having to show his humility even as bishop by doing hard manual labour every day, having to spend divine study, reading time and scribal time. To actually get time off of that to focus on a visible act of prayer that has an output that people can see and be part of in that way, is a big thing. And it would have been somebody very important, probably the bishop, and somebody working within the tradition of Columba, Aidan, and the later Bishop Cuthbert, who died in 687, and what he symbolised as a policy of reconciliation and trying to bring peoples together who, the closer they came, found they had differences but also similarities. His cult is built up on Holy Island by Bishop Eadfrith with the help of Bede and others in the early 8th century, to be a focus of pilgrimage where people can focus on this idea of harmony and collective fellowship and service of God, caring for one another and for creation. And so I think Cuddy's-Arle, we know that's where the bishops of Lindisfarne were allowed to go for Lent and Advent. The real hard men like Cuthbert would go out to the outer, inner and outer farms as well. But this is the focal point of it, and I think that's where that amazing book was made. So he also would have been, if you like, a Bear Grylls survivalist, because it's beautiful here today, but a lot of the time the wind blows directly from the Urals. And trying to work in those conditions in your little dry stone cobbled hut or your wooden hut would have been a real challenge. But that's part of it, because the sounds that we're hearing around us now, the smells, all of that enter into those pages.
But let's not get fooled. This was a clever production. This was groundbreaking in terms of the methods that were used, and there were some firsts here, weren't there?
Oh, absolutely. The Leonardo moment of this incredibly beautiful thing was made because it's somebody who dreams the dream, has the vision, lives the vision, and then is actually making it not in a scriptorium, but actually as an experimental chemist out in the world who's experimenting with the raw materials of creation around him to make this incredible artwork, and who I've shown invented, if you like, the lead pencil to give him the flexibility to be able to design on the page rather than having to do his designs on little wax tablets or offcuts of his dinner, bits of stone or slate or bone, etc. So he can actually design on the pages. And he invents the light box. His drawings are on the back of the pages. So when he puts the first thick layers of colour, pigment down, he hasn't lost the incredibly complex working out of the underdrawings. And so he would have used a writing surface of glass or transparent horn, which we know are both being made and used in Northumbria in his age. And he would have backlit them. So if you have many candles behind the page that you're working on, and one candle at your back, or a bigger window in front of you and a small one at your back, it creates a light box. So you can see your lines showing through without them painting on top of them, which means if you need then to refer to them in detail, you can turn the page over and they're still fully visible to you. And that's important because the compass marks, the divider marks and everything show us that the layout is governed by Euclidean and Pythagorean geometry, the geometry of the ancient world, using things like the golden section and ancient Jewish rabbinic number symbolism. So the whole thing is very theologically and intellectually vested to get this incredibly approachable and very sophisticated form of art that we can understand and perhaps appreciate more in the 21st century after Expressionism and abstract Expressionism than people in intervening ages could. When the book was first written about in the 1750s by Strutt, who'd just come back from Italy in the Grand Tour, looking at classical nudes designed according to the idealised golden section, he looked at Lindisfarne and called it a monstrous barbarity, because he couldn't understand the two-dimensionality of the figure forms of the evangelists, having to actually work with the two-dimensionality of the interlace and the Celtic spiral work, etc., and just how sophisticated it was and how the layout was all very informed by principles of design. And of course, phi, the building block of creation, symbolically as a number, is that which underpins the work in designing the Gospels. So it's incredibly erudite, but it's inspired by the passion of being in creation, and it's something that's designed to reach out so people, whatever their stage on their journey, whatever their background and levels of learning, given that most people looking at it couldn't read the words, would actually understand from the symbolism and could have it explained to them in different ways and could access it in different ways. But the ultimate complexity distills out of it the simplicity of the underlying gospel message, which is that you listen to Christ's teaching, you live a life of integrity, of service, of work, prayer, praise, in community and within creation. And it's that actually brings about the miracle of the book and the miracle of the prospect of actually being part of God's kingdom and working for it here on earth.
Well, what a fascinating mixture. Michelle, I'm tempted to say that's a wrap for us. Maybe there's something we could just say, you could say briefly about, it's 1300 years since Eadfrith's death.
Yes.
And I'm thinking, in this digital age, perhaps a very distracting age in some ways, what's the relevance of the book now, and would it even have a chance of being a book like it was then now? Somebody set about creating it. Such a thing of its time.
It is, and I think I often spend time thinking, if we were to create a mirror of our age that expressed our hopes for what our age could be and how it fits into the continuum of time and space and eternity, how would we express that for our age if we had to, and communicate it to ourselves and others, and inspire ourselves to do the very best with those opportunities that have been given to us? And I think, the digital age itself is fascinating. There's been a lot of talk over a long period now of where incredible expressions of important things like the Lindisfarne Gospels should actually be, because often they've followed politics, power, money, and they're often kept in places for nations. And often there's a move to say, bring it back. Sadly, if it was on Cadiz now, it wouldn't last very long. And I think the opportunities of the digital age to actually bring these incredible books that, even if we queued for days, either in 720 or now, we couldn't actually turn the pages ourselves. It wouldn't last. It wouldn't be there for future generations if everybody that wanted to touch it or kiss it, etc., did. It just wouldn't be there. But what we can do digitally is bring it in one form or another, whether hard copy output or the digital images themselves. We can bring it potentially into everybody's life that wants to actually access it, to explore it, to use it as a focus of thought, meditation, to analyse it in all sorts of ways. And we can share that around the world and with the peoples whose cultures are represented in its pages farther afield. And so the books like the Amiatinus that was taken as a present to the Pope from Weymouth Jarrow in 716 served as an ambassador for its age and its peoples, because only here in Northumbria then could this incredible thing have been made. And likewise, Lindisfarne, only of its age could it actually have emerged, and only here in this place. But it focuses us on what is the sense of place, what is the spirit of the age and the spirit of place. And that leads us, I hope, to think about what is the spirit of our age. Is there a spirit? How many of the people who've even heard about the Lindisfarne Gospels still see it as something that has the essential purpose of mission and ministry? People will say, what is in these mystical Lindisfarne scrolls? And you say, well, the name is on the tin. It's the Lindisfarne Gospels. It's made of calfskin, 350 of them, probably from about 4,000 to select perfect skins from, made by vegetarians because it's a long-lasting medium, to celebrate the collective buy-in of the whole of this massive area of the northeast and southern Scotland, with one person mediating that vision of what its contribution was and what it wasn't at the time. There was a lot of warfare, a lot of slavery, etc. But these people are working to abolish slavery. These books are places where you would come and swear on them to free slaves, to change your lives and to change society.
This book, though, survived over the 1300 years. We're still bothered about whether it's coming up to Newcastle or Durham, or could it even come here at some point. But it going back to that journey, and it's
Yes.
going to continue on its journey.
Yes.
It survived so many different twists and turns, and its relevance just seems to be bigger than ever.
Absolutely. And part of its relevance, I think, the Northeast is the fact it's not in the Northeast, because that captures people's attention. So the whole thing of regional identity, regional devolution for these things is very, very big. But I think for those who made it, they would have understood that, because they are very much the product of the unique circumstances of this area. But their reach is global. And they don't even just think in the present moment. They're able to conceive beyond that. If you think of the Celtic cross, the horizontal element is across space from Ireland to Syria. The verticality is time, how that present moment sits, past, present, future, all related to one another and continuing to have relevance. Either all counts or none of it counts. But the circle showing the quantum element of the eternal and of God. And so these people actually, from their 8th century perspective on little Holy Island, actually grasp the enormity of the cosmic logos, the creative force, and how that flows throughout the ages, throughout the people. And so their conceptualisation of where the book and Holy Island sit at the centre of that on a sliding, moving, parabolic diagram, if you like, is immense. And I think we do them and the book a disservice if we think about it solely in terms of our individual or local identities and journeys without thinking about how those relate to that bigger picture.
I'm still fascinated, though, by the fact that it's a book. So I'm looking around this beautiful room, and the books and the CDs and the vinyl records and photographs and pictures, and the medium is vellum from carves for the pages, all this amazing paint, all of the creativity that's gone into it, all of the mathematics and science and the spirituality and worship and the politics behind it. All in a book, though, a physical book with pages. And I'm wondering, crikey, what would they do now if they had digital as well?
And of course we think, well, the book is the new technology of that day.
Yes.
Books had only been on the landscape here for less than 100 years. It's a new thing, and to actually use the decoration in this informed way as part of that, it's new, it's cutting edge technology, and it is designed to communicate with a lot of people, even if it's one book and those people could only see the pages that were displayed to them at any one time. It has a lot of influence in lots of different ways. And the fact that it's a book, but it's the sounds that go with it. The book is to be read from, it would be read out loud, and people would see it being physically used in services, the biggest services, when the most people would come from hundreds and thousands of miles away sometimes to actually see that book being used in that circumstance in the theatre of the public liturgy and services. And it's a book that would have been accessible to be viewed, where people would tell you about it. It's a time when music wasn't written down. Music was viva voce, and so the papal chaplain comes over to Northumbria, to Weymouth Jarrow, and possibly even to Holy Island in the 70s, 80s, to actually teach them how to chant in the manner of Rome and Byzantium. And so that's incredible. But the guy who comes, he comes also to make sure that in the big church councils and the political meetings of the time, the G7 summits of their day, that we're not trying to go it alone and separatist, that we are part of that bigger collaborative picture. And that's his job, is to actually talk politics while he's here, as well as to sing divinely. And so that whole thing is very much occupied by sound, by smell, and all the other senses. These manuscripts were an incredible sensory experience in all sorts of ways. And that's perhaps difficult to us to understand when we've got such diverse multimedia, but books are the multimedia of their day. But they also work with things like sculptures that would have been painted often and looked far more like manuscripts than what we see out in the field today. Things like the Ruthwell and Bewcastle cross, with the wonderful words on Ruthwell of the cross speaking about about what it was like to be felled by enemies in a wood and be forced to become an instrument of torture and be clasped by the young warrior Christ as he climbs on the cross to accept his sacrifice to redeem the whole of mankind and creation, and what it's like to be buried in ignominy and then be dug up by Emperor Constantine's mother, the amateur archaeologist Helena, and then to be clad with gold and jewels and become the crux gemata, the symbol of eternal life and resurrection for Christians. And the carpet pages of the Lindisfarne Gospels have metalwork details put into them that show they are that crux gemata, they are that symbol of faith, but they're also done as the prayer mats that we know were being used here in Northumbria in the 8th century to kneel before those metalwork crosses and wooden crosses on Good Friday. And the liturgies for that only just make it into books made in Rome in 715 are marked by the decorated initials in the Lindisfarne Gospels, along with those of other churchmanships that have finally all been reconciled. 715 was a big year for people burying the hatchet. And that, I think, there are signs of things that can only occur in the Lindisfarne Gospels around 715 and the decade after that, and Eadfrith's death in 722, and the fact that the book is unfinished, I think, show that this senior spiritual member of the community was abreast of the latest politics of the church and state, but he was putting all of that in the service and trying to reconcile the differences and place them in the service of the job of actually being the hands and feet of Christ in the world, and trying to get your own small boat safely home to harbour in God, and to encourage as many others to set sail on that journey as well.
I'm just looking at the tide there and imagining walking out to work for a day on the Gospels.
I tell you, one time I was lucky enough to manage to scramble out to Cuddy's Isle just as the tide was almost to going over the top of your wellies, and so I had it all to myself. So I was out there for about 10-12 hours, I guess, until the tide turned again, just by myself. And after a while, you take it all in, you pray consciously, you're looking at everything, you take your photographs, and eventually, after a couple of hours, you stop doing that, and everything starts to accept you, and the insects are crawling all over you, and the plants almost start to grow over you, and you become part of place. And it's the sounds of the seals and the birds that then start taking you, and you can feel every touch of the breeze on your skin in a very, very different way. And I remember curling myself up eventually after about 5 hours, 6 hours, around the base of the wooden cross that's there, and you know what, you've got to let your mind be still to stop everything finally running about in it, contemplative prayer. And eventually you do that, and you're on receive finally instead of transmit. Even your prayers aren't structured anymore. And suddenly, it was the most meaningful, transformative moment of my life. Suddenly, it was like the whole of the heavens opened up and everything just joined together in one sublime, perfect note of harmony. And everything around me was part of that. And that's, for me, is what the Lindisfarne Gospels can actually summon up when I look at them, is being there on Cuddy's Isle in that moment.